Okay, there's essentially three ways to solve a quadratic formula. Actually, four ways. If there's no linear term, you can use what's called the square root property. But I'm going to show you quickly the three methods. You can check to see if the trinomial factors, of course, you have to have it equal to 0 before you start. The split the middle method says, hey, let's find the product of A times C, where A is 4, C is minus 9, that's negative 36. The fact that this is a negative here says that the multiples must have different signs, and so we want the difference between the multiples to be negative 9, whatever the value of B is. If this is a plus sign, the multiples have to have the same sign, and we'll add up to whatever B is. So you start listing the multiples of AC, and by the way, this is kind of an indication of what I've done on my scrap paper. So 1 times 36 has a difference of 35. That's not what we're looking for. 2 times 18 is 36. The difference between the multiples is 16. 3 times 12 is 36, and that does have a difference of 9. We want the difference to be minus 9. So we put the minus sign on the 12 and 3 plus on the 3. And here's what we mean by split the middle. This negative 9x we're going to separate into two terms, negative 12x and a plus 3x. The order doesn't matter. It's usually easier if you put the plus sign second. I won't comment right now on why that's true. And then we do factoring by grouping. We look at the first two terms as one group and the second two terms as a second group. Factor out the GCF from each group. So 4x divides both terms here. 4x times the quantity x minus 3. Double check mentally to see if you redistributed the 4x. You'd get what you started with. You do. And the second group has a common factor of 3, so factor it out. And now each of these terms on either side of this plus sign has a common binomial factor of x minus 3. So we can factor out, picture pulling out that x minus 3, and there are the terms that remain, 4x plus 3. So in essence, I've done FOIL and reverse. If you multiply these two binomials together using FOIL, you get what you started with. Now we use the zero product property, setting each factor equal to 0, solving for x. So there's your answers right there. Okay. Now on board 2, you can pause the video and look what I did here to complete the square. Completing the square requires you to take the constant term to the other side, divide through by the leading coefficient so that we can complete the square quite easily. So here I've divided every term by 4. To complete the square, kind of picture the little placeholders here for completing the square. Take half of b, which would be negative 9/8 squared, 81/64. That's what completes the square. So I have to add 81/64 to both sides. Now this trinomial is a perfect square trinomial. That's what we mean by completing the square. So I can rewrite it as x minus 9/8, the quantity squared. If I get a common denominator here, and add the fractions together, I get 225/64. Here's where you use the square root property. Something squared equals a positive number. You take the square root of both sides. On the right, you get plus or minus 15/8, square root of 225/64. Add 9/8 to both sides, and we've got plus 15 plus 9 all over 8 is 24/8, or 3. We've got minus 15 plus 9 is minus 6/8, or negative 3/4, which is exactly what we got on the first board. 3 or negative 3/4. And finally, you could use the quadratic formula, which again requires you to set the equation equal to 0. We're already in that form. So A has a value of 4, B negative 9, C negative 9. there's the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b, which would be 9, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 9 squared is 81, minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 9. Now over here, kind of on my scrap paper, maybe I figured out the value of the discriminant, the expression under the square root symbol, is 225. And so here we go. X equals 9 plus or minus the square root of 225 over 8. That's 9 plus or minus 15, which is the square root of 225 over 8. And of course, this means x sub 1. One of the roots is 24 over 8, or 3. X sub 2, the other root would be negative 6 over 8, or negative 3/4. Okay, so choice is yours. Which technique to use? Normally, you would use factoring if you can identify the factoring quickly. There you go. Hope that helped. If you have any questions, post a comment.